Okay, today we are on our fourth session, Risk Management, and thank you once again for tuning in. I hope that these sessions have been useful for you. And once again, today's session will be suitable for someone who is looking to take the ISC2 CC exam, as well as the CompTIA Security Plus exam. I'm Benjamin, and without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so if you look at risk management, there are generally four concepts that we have to take a look at: risk avoidance, risk transference, risk mitigation or reduction of that risk, as well as any acceptance of residual risk. And when we look at this, it's often done in sequence. So a company would always try to avoid risk as much as possible. At first, transfer it if it cannot be avoided, and then look into mitigation, and finally we accept whatever is residual risk is remaining. And the reason this is so is because it's less costly to actually do risk avoidance, and then the cost increases as it goes down the chain. Okay, so let us use an example to quickly take a look at what's an example of risk avoidance. So for this particular example, let's say we want to go skydiving. And skydiving is, really, I think it's an activity with rather high risk, and so we would have to do some risk management here. Yeah. Okay, so can we actually avoid the risk totally, by not skydiving? I would say it's not possible. If we really want to enjoy the activity of skydiving, and so we are not able to avoid that risk. But if we are able to avoid that risk, let's say do wind tunnel instead, something that is fully on land, then we would avoid all the risks that are associated with skydiving. Okay, so that will be risk avoidance. And similarly, for the activity of skydiving, what are some of the steps that we can do to transfer the risk? So a lot of the times when we look at risk transfer, we are looking at this thing called insurance. And so insurance would actually help to pay for some of the medical costs if something were to go wrong. So it's definitely a way of transferring some of that risk to the insurance company. And another one which we always look at when we are doing risk transference is called outsourcing. So for this particular act of skydiving, we cannot actually outsource it to someone else to skydive on our behalf. So it's not really applicable here. But for a lot of the operations that a company would perform, outsourcing is one way of actually transferring the risk to a third-party company. Yeah. And finally, we look at risk mitigation or reduction. If we are going to go ahead with the skydiving itself, how do we actually mitigate or reduce some of the risks? So some of it could be like checking for the weather forecast to make sure that the weather is calm before we jump out of the plane. It could be also things such as equipment check, make sure that the parachutes are working, things like that. And it could be personal protective equipment as well, helmets and everything like that, to minimize the impact of a bad fall and things like that. So these are ways that we can reduce the risk of skydiving. And of course, after we have done all of these steps here, the last remaining step is the acceptance of residual risk. So even after we have checked the weather, we've checked we've got good equipment, we've checked the PPE and everything like that, there is still weather might turn bad at the drop of a hat. Some of the equipment, it might just fail even though we've checked it, and then so there is still some residual risk that we have to be willing to say, after we've done all the steps, we are willing to accept the risk and we are willing to go ahead. Yeah. So these are some of the steps that we take with risk management. Okay, let's quickly take a look at some of the questions. Okay, so for question 1, a company decides to stop using an outdated vulnerable web application because it cannot be patched. What risk response is that this as an example of? So risk mitigation or risk reduction would be the act of patching. But for here, it cannot be patched. So, we are not looking at risk mitigation. Are we transferring the risk? Not really. We are not outsourcing anything. We are not, using insurance or anything like that. So there's no risk transfer as well. Risk avoidance. I would say this is risk avoidance here. And because, the keyword here is stop using. So we are totally stopping it. Such as we are totally stopping the act of skydiving, and we are choosing a wind tunnel instead. So this is totally avoiding the risk of using a web application. And risk acceptance would be to carry on what we are doing with nothing else, with no controls in place, which is not advisable, and it's actually not what's happening here as well. So for this question, it should be C. Okay, question 2. A business purchases cyber insurance to cover potential financial losses from a ransomware attack. What type of risk response is this? So the keyword insurance came up here. Just like the keyword outsourcing, this is a way of transferring the risk. So we are just saying that, we are going to carry on as per normal, and, if anything were to happen, insurance would cover our losses, and, we are transferring the risk over to the insurance company. We are not doing anything we can to, mitigate the risk, probably, put our documents in the cloud, things like, even things like employee phishing training, which, would be good to mitigate a ransomware attack. Risk avoidance. We can't really avoid the risk that comes from a ransomware attack unless we say we go documentless. Every single transaction, is in a system, or is in the cloud or something like that. And that would be a form of, I would say possibly that could be risk transfer as well, because we are outsourcing it to a cloud. Yeah. But for this case, because the clear cut here, it's insurance, and it's clear cut risk transfer. And yeah, we are also not accepting the risk because yeah. Okay, question 3. An organization implements multi-factor authentication and endpoint protection to reduce the likelihood of account compromise. This is as an example of risk avoidance. No, we are not avoiding the risk. So there is still some risk of account compromise. We are reducing the likelihood only. So we are not like totally avoiding the risk. Risk transfer, no, there's no outsourcing or insurance having here. Risk mitigation, yes, in fact this is mitigating the risk, so we are actually reducing the risk greatly, and this is through MFA, so that even if our passwords get stolen, it's still alright, because there is a second factor in play here. The phone or the token is still protecting the account here. Yeah. So this is indeed risk mitigation. Question 4. A company identifies that its legacy payroll system has multiple vulnerabilities that cannot be patched. Instead of replacing immediately, they continue using it but implement additional monitoring, MFA, and backup procedures. Which risk responses are being applied? So we see MFA and backup and additional monitoring. So immediately we know that part of it is risk mitigation already. Yeah. So this is possible answers here, B or C. So is there any residual risk acceptance? Okay, so I believe here there would be residual risk acceptance because they continue using it. So they are saying that let's say this is a high level of risk, initially, and then after they implement MFA and backups and everything like that, we lower down the risk to a lower level. And then they are saying that yeah, I mean it's fine, that now that the risk is at a lower level, we are willing to accept it at this level here. It's a lot more difficult for an attacker to actually compromise the system now that they have so many they have backup monitoring and MFA, and they are willing to accept whatever residual risk remains in using this legacy payroll system. So definitely for this question, the answer would be C. Okay, question 5. Which of the following is the best example of risk avoidance? So encrypting sensitive data at rest, I would say this is risk mitigation or reduction. And so because when we encrypt the sensitive data, even if an attacker managed to compromise and access the server, they will only be able to exfiltrate the encrypted data. And so we are reducing the risk of actually the plain text data being leaked out to the public. Disabling a vulnerable feature in a software application. Yeah, this could be risk avoidance. We are saying that hey, this particular feature is vulnerable, and we can take steps to reduce the vulnerability. This is that would be risk reduction. We could possibly add in MFA or whatever it is to reduce the risk, and that would be a reduction. But we are choosing to totally disable it. So we say, okay, let's do away with the entire feature. We are not going to use it, so we are avoiding it by disabling it entirely. Yeah. Okay. Let's examine some of the other options. Purchasing cyber insurance. This is more of transfer of risk. Yeah, because we are not really avoiding anything that's happening. We are still letting it happen. We are just saying that we are insured and we'll get compensated if it happens. conducting regular vulnerability scans, and again this is risk reduction. By conducting regular scans, what we are hoping to achieve is to more frequently be able to identify any vulnerabilities and patch them as soon as possible. So we are reducing the risk in that sense. Yeah. Okay, question 6. A healthcare organization outsources its email system to a cloud provider under an SLA that guarantees uptime. However, they still maintain basic monitoring internally and prepare for minor disruptions. Which risk response does this best illustrate? Okay, so we have the keyword here of outsource, and immediately we are thinking of risk transfer. Are we avoiding the risk? Not really, because we are still using that email. We are still using email systems. We are not saying we are totally avoiding the use of email, and so there will still be some risk that remains. So this is not here. It looks most like risk transfer at the moment. When we look at risk mitigation, there's still some risk mitigation because they are doing monitoring and preparing for disruptions. But then again, it's, I think the keyword here, they are doing just basic and minor. So this is very basic risk mitigation over here. And yeah, I think there's still some risk mitigation, but primarily they are just outsourcing. That's the main focus here. And I would say, since this question asks for what does this best illustrates, I would say transference would be the primary, really the primary response. Yeah, and mitigation would be secondary. Yeah. Residual risk acceptance, not really mentioned in this question here. They didn't really mention any acceptance of the risk. Yeah. So for this question, I would say the better answer would be B. Okay, question 7. After installing firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and conducting staff training, some risk from phishing attacks still exists. Management decides that these risks are acceptable. This is an example of, okay, I think this is really residual risk acceptance. They has already mentioned that these risks are acceptable, and they have done some of this stuff here, and some risks still exist because we cannot fully avoid risk. Yeah. So I would say the question is very self-explanatory, and really this would be residual risk acceptance. Yeah. If we were to dig into all of this, the firewalls and everything, all these are examples of risk mitigation. But because there's so much of an emphasis on the existing risk and accepting of the existing risk, the answer to this question should be residual risk acceptance. Okay, our final question. A software development company decides to stop using an unsupported third-party library that is critical but highly vulnerable. What risk response does this best represent? Okay, again, we see that the keyword here, stop using, totally disable a feature or totally stop using a feature, and really, I think these are the keywords that point towards risk avoidance, because we are totally stopping it. We are not skydiving at all, and this is an example of fully avoiding the risk. And although it's critical to the functioning, but we still choose to do it for the sake of security. So this would really be risk avoidance here. Yeah, there's no mention of mitigation. Usually with mitigation, there's still some residual risk that they have to accept, and when you stop using it, there's isn't that residual risk. Yeah. There's no transferring, there's no outsourcing, no insurance in play here. And yeah, there's no residual risk, as we have mentioned. Yeah, so all these are out, and the answer should be B. Okay, that's it for today, and I hope that this session has been useful. And if you liked it, please subscribe, and I'll see you in future sessions. Thank you.